Josh peered over the edge of the cellar, eyes watering with the stink of sulfur and mint. His first impression was that the usually quiet shop was crowded. 4 men facing Nick Fleming, the owner, 3 of them huge and hulking, one smaller and sinister looking. Josh immediately guessed that the shop was being robbed. His boss, Nick Fleming, stood in the middle of the bookshop facing the others. He was a rather ordinary-looking man, average height and build, with no real distinguishing features, except for his eyes, which were so pale that they were almost completely colorless. His black hair was cropped so close to his skull, and he always seemed to have stubble on his chin, as if he hadn't shaved for a couple of days. He was dressed as usual in simple black jeans, a loose t-shirt advertising a concert that had taken place 25 years earlier, and a pair of battered cowboy boots. There was a cheap digital watch on his left wrist and a heavy silver link bracelet on his right, alongside 2 tatty multicolored friendship bracelets. Facing him was a small gray man in a smart suit. Josh realized that they were not speaking, and yet something was going on between them. Both men were standing still, their arms close to their bodies, elbows tucked in, open palms turned upward. Nick was in the center of the shop, while the gray man was standing close to the door. His 3 black-coated companions stood around him. Strangely, both men's fingers were moving, twitching, dancing, as if they were typing furiously. Thumb brushing against forefinger, little finger touching thumb, index and little finger extended. Tendrils and wisps of green mist gathered in Fleming's palms, then curled into ornate patterns and drifted onto the floor, where they writhed like serpents. Foul yellow tinged smoke coiled and dripped from the gray man's gloved hands, shattered onto the wooden floor like dirty liquid. The stench rolled off the smoke, thickening the atmosphere with a scent of peppermint and sulfur. Josh felt his stomach twist and lurch as he swallowed hard. The rotten egg smell was enough to make him gag. The air between the 2 men shimmered with tendrils of green and yellow smoke, and where they touched, sparks hissed and sizzled. Fleming's fingers moved, and a long, fist-thick coil of green smoke appeared in the palm of his hand. He blew on it, a thick hissing breath, and it spun onto the air, twisting and untwisting at head height between the 2 men. The gray man's short, stubby fingers tapped their own rhythm, and a yellow ball of energy spun from his hands and bobbed away. It touched the coil of green smoke, which immediately wrapped around the ball. There was a sparking snap, and the invisible explosion blew both men backward across the room, sending them crashing across the tables of books. Light bulbs popped, and fluorescence shattered, raining powdery glass onto the floor. 2 of the windows exploded outward, while another dozen of the small square panes shattered and spiderwebbed. Nick Fleming tumbled to the floor, close to the opening to the cellar, almost landing on top of Josh, who was standing frozen on the steps, wide-eyed with shock and terror. As Nick clambered to his feet, he pushed Josh back down the stairs. "Stay down. Whatever happens, stay down," he hissed, his English touched with an indefinable accent. He straightened as he turned, and Josh saw him turn his right palm upward, bring it close to his face, and blow into it. Then he made a throwing motion toward the center of the room, as if he were lobbing a ball. Josh craned his neck to follow the movement, but there was nothing there. And then it was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Books were suddenly ripped from the nearby shelves, drawn into an untidy heap in the center of the floor. Framed prints were dragged from the walls. A heavy woolen rug curled upward and was sucked into the center of the room. Then the heap exploded. Two of the big men in black overcoats caught the full force of the explosion. Josh watched as the books, some heavy and hard, others soft and sharp, flew around them like angry birds. He winced in sympathy as one man took the full force of a dictionary in the face. It knocked away his hat and sunglasses, revealing dead-looking, muddy gray skin and eyes like polished black stones. A shelf of romance novels battered against his companion's face, snapping the cheap sunglasses in two. Josh discovered that he, too, had eyes that looked like stones, and then suddenly he realized that they were stones. He was turning to Nick Fleming, a question forming on his lips when his boss glanced at him. "Stay down," he commanded. He brought the golems. Fleming ducked as the gray man sent 3 long spear-like blades of yellow energy across the room. They sliced through the bookshelves and stabbed into the wooden floor. Everything they touched immediately started to rot and putrefy. Leather bindings snapped and cracked, paper blackened, wooden floorboards and shelves turned dry and powdery. Fleming tossed another invisible ball into the corner of the room. Josh Newman followed the motion of his boss's arm. As the unseen ball sailed through the air, a shaft of sunlight caught it, and for an instant he saw it glow green and fastened like an emerald globe. Then it moved out of the sunlight and vanished again. This time, when it hit the floor, the effect was even more dramatic. There was no sound, but the entire building shook. Tables of cheap paperbacks dissolved into matchwood, and slivers of paper filled the air with bizarre confetti. 2 of the men, in black, the golems, were slammed against the shelves, bringing books tumbling down on top of them, while a third, the biggest, was pushed so hard against the door that he was propelled out onto the street. And in the silence that followed came the sound of gloved hands clapping. "You have perfected that technique, I see, Nicholas." And the gray man spoke English with a curious lilt. "I've been practicing, John," Nick Fleming said, sliding toward the open cellar door, shoving Josh Newman further down the stairs. "I knew you would catch up with me sooner or later. We've been looking for you for a very long time, Nicholas. You've got something of ours, and we want it back." A sliver of yellow smoke bit into the ceiling above Fleming's and Josh's heads. Bubbling rotten black plaster drifted down like bitter snowflakes. "I burned it," Fleming said. "Burned it a long time ago." He pushed Josh even further into the cellar and pulled the sliding door closed, sealing them both in. "Don't ask," he warned, his pale eyes shining in the gloom. "Not now." Catching Josh by the arm, Nick pulled him into the darkest corner of the bookstore cellar, caught a section of shelving in both hands, and jerked it forward. There was a click, and the shelving swung outward, revealing a set of steps hidden behind it. Fleming urged Josh forward into the gloom. "Quickly now, quickly and quietly," he warned. He followed Josh into the opening and pulled the shelves closed behind him, just as the cellar door turned into a foul black liquid and flowed down the stairs with the most appalling stench of sulfur. "Up," Nick Fleming's voice was warm against Josh's ear. "This comes out in the empty shop next door to ours. We have to hurry. It'll take Dee only a few moments to realize what's happened." Josh Newman nodded. He knew the shop. The dry cleaners had been empty all summer. He had 100 questions, and none of the answers that ran through his mind were satisfactory, since most of them contained that one awful word in them: magic. He had just watched two men toss balls and spears of something, of energy, at each other. He had witnessed the destruction those energies had caused. Josh had just witnessed magic. But of course, everyone knew that magic simply did not and could not exist.